Hello, welcome back to Loki's Librarian. If you are new here, welcome. I am your librarian, Katrina, and on Sundays I do a thing called Books and Booze, where I review a book and mix up a cocktail. This month I decided to take a look at mind expansion, making this week's book DMT, the Spirit Molecule. A lot of glare there. DMT, the Spirit Molecule, a doctor's revolutionary research into the biology of near-death and mystical experiences by Rick Strassman, MD. The accompanying cocktail is an ayahuasca cocktail. No actual ayahuasca is found in it, but it is 50 milliliters of Pisco, 50 milliliters of pineapple juice, a dash of lime juice, 30 milliliters of pineapple syrup. Top it off with club soda. So let's do this. Guess what? This is not a twist off. DMT is the short version of dimethyltryptamine, so I'm going to keep calling it DMT because that is a mouthful. It is a naturally occurring psychedelic substance that is found in everyone and a great many of everything. I don't want to say everything. I don't think we've tested all the things on the planet. I had this discussion with my super smart chemistry friend, and she's like, I feel like saying it's in everything is a bit of an exaggeration, like hyperbole for, writing purposes, but it is found in an awful lot of things. Okay, fair enough. DMT, so it is naturally produced. You have it, I have it, everybody has it, but it is everywhere. All right. It is the sort of natural high that if you really wanted to go down a deep well, they could never actually test you for, because yes, you 100% have DMT in your body right now. DMT is the active psychedelic agent in ayahuasca, hence the cocktail choice. Although again, no psychoactives, psychotropic, I should say, substances are in this cocktail, just alcohol, regular alcohol. The only drug I'm allowed to take legally, alcohol. If it's so prevalent, why aren't we all walking around stoned out of our gourds every single day, right? I mean, if it's so prevalent, surely we must all just be high all the time, which kind of harkens back to Michael Malice's theory that The Matrix was a documentary, and we are in fact all living in the Matrix. If you take DMT in a sufficient quantity, you're going to wake your ass up. Maybe that's what was in the red pill. Maybe it was just pure unadulterated DMT at such a high dose it was able to shock him out of the battery pack. I don't know. Just a thought. So I have those two. I have to do lime. A dash of lime. I have a pre-sliced thing of lime here, so we're just going to squeeze that in there and call it good. There's my dash. Well, the reason we're not walking around stoned all the time is that we all also naturally produce MAOs, monoamine oxidase, which keeps the DMT in check naturally for most people. Strassman discusses that during the early days of psychedelic research, meaning approximately between 1947 and 1970, when Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act and that asshole Nixon signed it, there was a great deal of inroads made into the study of what causes schizophrenia and psychotic breaks. And a lot of that research included psychedelics. It was even mentioned in The Doors of Perception 2 weeks ago? Earlier this month, right? Where he said, hey, people who take mescaline, you're experiencing the good side of it, but that's what it's like for schizophrenics all the time. Basically, yes. So during this 23-year period, it was discovered that people with schizophrenia naturally produce higher levels of DMT combined with naturally produced MAOIs, or monoamine oxidase inhibitors, so MAOIs, which means they are walking around stoned all the time, and it's not fun. All right, if you're thinking that that would be cool, think about the hellscape of somebody who's in a psychotic break is going through. It's not cool. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Let me shake this up. It goes into a highball glass, and you top it off with club soda. So we're gonna do that. Supposed to have fresh rosemary to garnish. I did not get the rosemary. Oh, well, that definitely fills up a good chunk of the glass. I mean, I can top it with the club soda, but yeah, a lot of it's going to be alcohol. So let's see. I didn't shake the club soda. Why is that fuzzing on me? All right. Okay, so ayahuasca is actually produced by the introduction of harmaline or beta-carboline to DMT brew, right? So it's carefully made, usually in the jungles. Actually, yeah, I'm going to say usually in the jungles of South America, because there are ayahuasca churches here in the United States that if you're not, prohibited in some capacity from joining by, say, employment, you could totally go there. There are exactly two harmaline, the producers of beta-carbolines, is found naturally in 2 plants so far. All right, again, I'm not sure how many plants have been tested for it, but we know for a fact it's found in 2 plants. In South America, they find it in Banisteriopsis caapi, which is what goes into the DMT brew to make ayahuasca. In Europe and Africa, it's found in Syrian rue. It's kind of bland. I'm a little disappointed. It's kind of bland. It has a little bit of a kick, but I think it has to do with the pineapple syrup I got has a chipotle in it too, so it's got a little spice in there, which is good because otherwise it's a little bland. It's okay. And it's drinkable. I mean, it's not, completely gross and stuff, but I can drink it, but it's a little on the bland side. Anyways, where was I at? So what's so special about harmaline / beta-carbolines, because there are lots of plants that can inhibit MAOs in the human body. All right, that's how we ended up getting MAOIs for like antidepressants and stuff like that, right? And SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. All of these things, they're initially found in nature. All right, most things are found in nature, and then we just find ways to break them down and make them easier for humans to take. But it basically, Banisteriopsis caapi and Syrian rue, harmaline, suppress all the MAOs, not just 1 or 2 at a time, but all of them at the same time. So it temporarily suppresses the monoamine oxidases that interfere with experiencing DMT. So that is why it is so effective in nature, because when you eat DMT, your body immediately breaks it down. Like somewhere between your mouth and your stomach, the DMT is gone. It's wiped out because the MAOs are so effective at suppressing it. So where does this come from? Where does DMT come from, right? We know it's found in plants. We know it's found in humans, but where do humans get it if we're not able to just ingest it, like, vitamins or whatever? Well, and that's the fascinating question that Dr. Strassman is trying to determine. And it's his belief that the primary source of its creation is the pineal gland. What is the pineal gland? Here's where it gets interesting. The pineal gland is found deep inside your brain. All right. I mean, it's basically hidden straight back from here. Like if, I am not recommending this. Don't go for the lobotomy. But if you put a spike right here, right through your third eye, right, and it went straight back. No deviations in path. You're going to go right through your pineal gland. It's right freaking there, right? Its primary function is the creation of melatonin, that stuff that helps you sleep at night. Some interesting things about the pineal gland is that while it is found in the brain, it is not actually composed of brain tissue. It's actually found of mouth tissue. It forms in your mouth during gestation. And on the 49th day, it moves into position in your brain and begins producing melatonin and DMT. Now, if you want an interesting spiritual connection, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I have not read yet, although I do have it, it's going to be part of my spiritual journey. Dr. Strassman references this because he was Buddhist. All right, on the 49th day after death, that's when the soul reincarnates. So you don't just die and then are immediately born into whatever baby happens to be closest at the time of your death. You go through a 49-day transition period where you're learning all the things you need to learn about death and dying before you are reborn on the 49th day. And that synchronicity between 49 days after conception and the pineal gland moves into place, and 49 days after death you reincarnate, that struck Dr. Strassman. So he believes on the 49th day, a baby gets its soul, because that's where DMT comes from. The spirit molecule comes from the pineal gland, which is buried in your brain. I'm getting goosebumps right now, like right through here. My own thought on reading this, because he couldn't figure out why it forms in the mouth and then moves to the brain. All right, he never. As soon as I read that, I'm like, well, I know why it is, like just instinctually. And obviously, there's no proof of this. It's just an instinctual thought that popped into my head as soon as he said that. Is the pineal gland forms in the mouth so that we may speak the word of God, and is protected in the brain right behind the third eye, right? So that you can connect to God. Also, if the pineal gland is the seat of the soul and he's right on reincarnation, we should all really rethink the legality of abortion after 49 days. Because if Dr. Strassman is right, after 49 days, that baby has a soul. And if I'm right, then at 49 days, that baby now knows the name of God, whoever that may be for you, right? Whatever God force you worship, your baby is now aware of it at that point in time. Now bring on the hate, folks. I know that that's not a popular opinion. Cocktail's growing on me. Now, Dr. Strassman learned that DMT is produced in massive quantities during major trauma. And I'm not talking about the, the social trauma of being misgendered on the street. I mean, major, near death. When you are seeing around the corners to heaven's gates, your brain is likely producing DMT. Another major source of traumatic production of DMT is when you give birth, assuming it's a natural birth and not a cesarean section, because cesarean section, not that it's any less life or death, it's certainly actually more life or death, because obviously they wouldn't do a cesarean section if it wasn't medically an emergency, right? But there's something about that release of endorphins when you're giving birth that both produces more DMT in both the mother and the baby during canal birth. So I don't know if, he specifically says, like, it specifically in the book says that, during canal birth, not cesarean birth. But now I gotta wonder if it's maybe just the baby who's not experiencing the DMT during a cesarean, because the mother is certainly in a life and death situation at that point in time, right? And we know that DMT releases in greater excess at death. I think I'm reading that right. I think I'm remembering that correctly. Now, nearly 20 years after all psychedelics were classified as Schedule 1 in 1970, meaning no known benefit, likely to be highly addictive, Dr. Strassman finds himself in a professional position to see if he could get legal clearance to start experimenting with DMT clinically. All right. He is a medical doctor, not just like a doctor, not a PhD, but a medical doctor. So he's Dr. Rick Strassman, MD, medical doctor. So he's going for a professional clinical setting, all right? And he includes a very detailed description of the application process, not just to the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, where the study would take place and where he was currently employed, but he had to apply to the DEA, who had to authorize the use of the Schedule 1 drug. He had to include a detailed description of how this would be tracked and monitored against theft and misuse. And he had to apply to the FDA, who would have to approve whoever made the DMT's production to ensure that it was safe for human use, not just lab use for lab rats, but actually safe for human consumption. Because he's not out there mixing up ayahuasca in the field. He wants to do injections, right? He would have to get even more import licenses from the USDA if he wanted to import, the Capi Banisteria Capi? The fuck? Banisteriopsis capsi. He would have to get even more permission. Syrian rue will grow quite well in New Mexico, but it's also considered an invasive species here in the United States. It's not native. So, if you plant it, if park rangers see it anywhere, they'll kill it with fire and extreme prejudice, because it is an invasive species here that will choke out native grasses, native bushes, native weeds. So you couldn't just get Syrian rue and make a go of it. He would have to get somebody up here from South America who knew how to make it. So it would be a lot more hoops to jump through to try and make it as an ayahuasca thing versus having somebody just mix up straight up DMT and get it passed by FDA inspectors for human injection, which means a straight shot to the bloodstream, bypassing the stomach, which is where the MAOs would break it down and make it unable to be used unless it was an ayahuasca brew. So he jumps through all these hoops, and it takes nearly 2 years, very nearly. All right. I mean, he first started writing his proposal in July of 1988 and submitted his proposal to University of New Mexico in January 89. It was the very first proposal submitted that year. So he was given the record number of 001-89 or 89001, something like that. So submitted January 89 to all parties and received all the green lights from the various agencies involved in November of 1990. So very nearly 2-year process to get this approved. In November 1990, he started with just 2 volunteers to discover what the best doses would be for high, medium, and low doses, and would they be injected intramuscularly or intravenously. Now, initially he tried to do the intramuscular, which had minimal impact. I mean, the guy, yes, got high, but it wasn't quite what anybody was... The effects weren't what was... I don't want to say expected because they didn't know what to expect, but it wasn't ideal. So they went with intravenous, which means, again, pure DMT directly injected into the bloodstream so that the high bypasses the stomach, and there you go. So I believe the low dose he came up with was 0.05 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. High dose was 0.4 milligrams per kilogram. I think the medium was 0.2. Now, I know in Dr. Strassman's book, The Psychedelic Handbook, he talks about set, setting, and dose. Since this was all for science, science dictated all 3. This is not necessarily a good thing. I mean, the dose was fine, all right? Absolutely, science should dictate the dose so that you don't overdose, right? So that they determined that 0.4 milligram per kilogram was determined to be the best high dose based on one of the first two volunteers. They gave him a 0.6 milligram dose, and that was way too high, so they rolled it back just a bit. Set and setting, one feeds the other. Set is your mental preparedness for this to get the best results, and as part of his screening process, he wanted people who had already had experience with psychedelics. Partly this was to minimize legal risk, right, of somebody gaining dependency on the drug being administered. If they were already known users, they couldn't really point at DMT and the university and say, hey, they did this to me, this is why I'm now addicted, because the university could then come back and say, no, you filled out your questionnaire and said that you had done all these other psychedelics, so prove it was us, basically. It's fair. I get it. All right. When people in an increasingly litigious society, you got to do what you can to protect yourself. This is how they protected themselves. They picked people who were already known users of psychedelics. Also meant they were known to break the law because psychedelics are illegal. So there's kind of a you burn me and I'll burn you path there. But for all that, the people who participated in the study knew this was taking place at a medical facility. And this undoubtedly colored some people's experiences, that the setting, right? It's a hospital room. They tried to make it as pleasant as possible. They actually had a room that was designated theirs primarily. I mean, other people could use it if it wasn't being used for DMT, but booking first priority went to the DMT study. And they made it as pleasant as possible, but you need the medical equipment, right? They need to monitor vital signs, check for, your pulse and heart rate, and if there is a medical emergency where your heart stops, they need to have the equipment in the room to restart it, right? Nobody actually died during this experiment, by the way, but this was a medical precaution they needed to have on hand because they didn't know what the impact was going to be of DMT. It ended up being vitally important because one participant was only able to take one dose and their blood pressure skyrocketed so high that they had to discontinue him from the study because they're like, we can't risk another incident like that because literally your heart could explode. You could have a stroke if we do this again. So you're out of the study. And the guy understood because he didn't want to die. I mean, nobody wants to die for a good time, right? Setting feeds set, and quite a few participants reported seeing beings who were medically experimenting on them. Not Dr. Strassman and his study nurses, but like alien beings, like lizards and insects and, aliens. And you gotta wonder, would their experiences have been different if this had happened in a beautiful park outside? People reported explosions of color and sound. Sometimes the beings they encountered seemed threatening. Others were very comforted by them. Not everyone had a pleasant trip. One volunteer began screaming, no, 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 after the injection, like loud enough the people in the hallway were like, ooh, what's going on in there? Oh my God. One reported being sexually assaulted by, I think it was alligators. That's a bad trip, man. Several reported feeling like they were dying, although none of them were scared of that. Like when they experienced it, they weren't scared that they were going to die right then. They thought they were dying, but they weren't scared of it. I hope that makes sense. Which supports Dr. Strassman's belief that death releases a high amount of DMT, like naturally. Now, the experiment ran from 1991 to 1995, and Dr. Strassman had several factors that led to him winding it down. Some were personal. He had family issues, and he calls her former wife, but I think they may have still been married at the time of the writing, or at the time of the experiment. And she's a former wife now. He wrote the book in 2001, so about 6 years after it all wound down. At least that's when it was published. So I think she was probably his wife at the time, but she wanted to relocate to Canada for their daughter, or her daughter, I don't know. He had a grad student assistant who got way too involved experimenting with other psychedelics with the experiment volunteers. So, they'd trip on DMT and the grad student would go home with them and they'd all drop acid or eat psilocybin. It was happening free. It made Dr. Strassman uncomfortable, but then after another incident not related to the study, Dr. Strassman had to actually forbid him from doing so. The kid showed up eventually at Dr. Strassman's house wanting to drop acid with him, which boggles the mind. I'm trying to imagine any of my jobs where I would have just popped by my boss's house to hang out and just, I just can't. I mean, I've been blessed with my supervisors. I get along. I don't think there's any of them that I haven't gotten along with fairly well. But there's a very clear professional line in the sand, and dropping acid with your boss at his house is definitely one of them. Just no. Dr. Strassman wanted to branch out and repeat the experiment, but with psilocybin. The problem he had here is he couldn't get the university's blessing to take psilocybin outside of the hospital and into nature. Why is that a problem? Well, the average length of the DMT trip in his experiment, even the highest dose of 4 milligrams per kilogram, was 15 minutes. Right? It really does burn through that fast, all right? Which is why, I mean, other than the fact that it's endogenously produced in the human body, the fact that it only takes 15 minutes to burn through it, I'm like, why is this illegal? Not because of the shortness of the duration, but how are you ever going to catch somebody who's using it? I mean, what the hell? I mean, I guess theoretically you could find, track marks if they're injecting intravenously, but if it's intramuscular, I mean, there are muscles all over the body. They could stab themselves in the ass and you'd never know. Generally within 30 minutes to an hour, a participant was good to go home. The average duration of a psilocybin trip is 5 to 6 hours. I mean, 15 minutes in a hospital room may not be ideal, but for science, most were willing to do it. 6 hours tripping balls stuck in a room in a less idealistic setting, hospital room, beeping equipment, people having medical emergencies outside, that's a harder sell. That's going to make for a rough trip, and people were not as keen for that. For liability reasons, if somebody has a heart attack, they want to have Johnny on the spot to help them. It just, the university wouldn't go for it. So there was that hurdle, and he was having a hard time finding volunteers and being willing to do it. Then there was the brick wall he ran into with his spiritual community. I mentioned earlier he was Buddhist. Well, initially he had support from the Buddhist community, right? And there was some excitement of this level of enlightenment there. Main monk, I forget the spiritual title, but it's the guy at the top of the hierarchy in the American Buddhist community, died. And in the rush for the political election to supreme position, the Pope of the Buddhist community, if you will, the community came out hard against the use of psychedelics to seek enlightenment, despite the fact that the ultimate winner of this race to the top of the Buddhist spiritual hierarchy had their own first enlightenment experience under the influence of, I think it was LSD. Might have been psilocybin, but regardless, it was ironic and hypocritical. The Buddhist community came down hard on Dr. Strassman to end his study, as there shouldn't be any shortcuts to spirituality or enlightenment. Which just reminded me of Brian Maresca's book, The Immortality Key. Well, they may be half right, though. Not entirely wrong in you shouldn't rush it like this. But to a certain degree, I think by this point in time, Dr. Strassman had reached that conclusion. I think part of that may have been one of the participant studies, Carlos. He's called Carlos in the book. I don't know if that was his real name, because Dr. Strassman quite rightly takes patient confidentiality very seriously, and so may have used a pseudonym in his book. Carlos, at the end of his doses, said something like he wouldn't do it again without ceremony set around it. Set and setting are everything. This was not a spiritual event. It was scientific, and that was the set Carlos had walking into it, is that this is scientific. So he didn't have any real expectations of having a spiritual epiphany, because this wasn't a spiritual setting. It was a scientific setting. Ceremony there was some elements of ceremony, but it was scientific ceremony. It was the, laying out of the syringes with the DMT on the bedside table, and the double checking, are you ready for the injection? Here's what's going on, and the walking them through it. But that's not the same thing as chanting, group chanting to open up the chakra, right? It's not the same thing as drums to set the mood. It's not being out in nature and touching grass to keep you grounded in reality while your mind is off in the stars. That's not what's going on here. You're in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping monitors and chaos outside the doors. Completely different. Setting makes all the difference. So Carlos said he wouldn't do it again unless it was a ceremony, unless it was like a religious ceremony. And Dr. Strassman, I think, to a degree agrees, because he knows how stressful being in the hospital was for him, and he wasn't the one getting the DMT. He was just the administrator and observer. Dr. Strassman, in his closing thoughts, provided other studies he would like to see done. Again, this book was released in 2001. I don't know if these have since been done, but he wants to test how much DMT is found in a mother at the moment of delivery and their newly born babies. How much is present in the newly born baby, right? How would a slow drip release of DMT impact your dreams, right? You go to sleep at night and you receive a very slow drip of DMT over the course of the night. How is that going to impact your dreams? Does it impact your dreams? If the study had been done outside the confines of a hospital, how would that have impacted the participants' experiences? Would they have had more spiritual and less, oh my God, I'm being experimented on? He does spend several chapters, like a good chunk of the book is broken into various sections of some people had this kind of experience, which would be the, I'm being experimented on. Some people had this kind of experience, which was very spiritual. Some people had a near-death experience where they firmly believed they were going to die and they were okay with it and they saw the other side and everything was peaceful and they were fine with that. Some people simply had the profoundly psychedelic with all the colors and the lights, right? Several people reported hearing a very loud hum, which I feel like he was in New Mexico, but I don't think he was in Taos. Maybe he was in Taos. I feel like there was a spot in New Mexico that's like known for having a weird hum that hasn't ever been explained. Like nobody knows where it comes from, which it's a harmonic thing that hasn't been explained yet. I'm sure there is a reason, but nobody's been able to find it yet. They will eventually, because it'll stop and they'll be like, oh, well, it stopped the day that land formation fell over or whatever. But for now, nobody knows. I don't know. I'm half remembering something I read a long time ago, so I could be dead wrong on that. This book was fascinating, and it was exceptionally well written. It pulled me right along before I knew what I was done reading it. I think there is so much more that we don't know, and until the government gets out of our way, we won't know. And I'm not referencing those who just go out and try to see, because the spiritual seekers will always exist, and they'll always say, fuck the government, and they'll go out and do their own thing. I'm talking about the actual science of it, all right? We're not going to know what actually goes on chemically in the brain under the influence of a high dose of psilocybin, because who wants to spend 6 hours in an MRI machine? Having that resonance done over and over and over again in a very loud machine just for science. That's not going to be a good trip. That's not going to be a good experience. Who wants to do that, right? It sounds horrifying, but I mean, what might you learn? Do psychedelics open the consciousness to other dimensions, to the multiverse? Those are theories that he postulates in the book could be possible, but we don't know. Is the pineal gland the seat of the soul? How would we measure such? How would we know? And the government does an awful lot to throw up barriers to those because we all need protecting from ourselves. And that's it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next Sunday. Bye.